everyone, it's Steph. This is the Noveltea Corner and welcome back to another Psy-Changeling chat. This time we are talking about Bonds of Justice, which is book 8 in the series. I've been filming one of these very long, chatty, very detailed breakdowns of the story for all of the books so far. I am also part of the team co-hosting the Psy-Changeling read-along. In the Psy-Changeling readathon, we are reading 3 books every month from the Psy-Changeling series. This is the second book for the month of March. I do have book 9 still to read. Or reread, because these are all rereads for me. Yeah, we're going to chat about this in quite a bit of detail. I'm going to talk about the main world plot. I'm going to talk about the world facts that get built up. So things that don't directly impact on probably the 2 main characters of the story as much as they just impact the general world building, and then the things that I just found fun, little mentions and bits and pieces at the end of the book. It's probably going to be a long one, so grab yourself a drink, get comfy, and let's chat about Bonds of Justice. In Bonds of Justice, we are following a human and a Psy couple. So the human is Max Shannon, who is a enforcement officer, and we first met him in book 4 when he was helping out Talon with finding the kids who had gone missing in connection to the Shine Foundation. We also have Sophia Russo, who is a J-Psy or a Justice Psy. Justice Psy are telepaths who have the ability to enter the mind of a criminal and to retrieve specific memories and then show those memories to other people. And so they've become a specialized brand of telepath who really work in the justice system, and there are some limitations on their powers as well, which we'll talk about a little bit later on. But Sophia's psychic abilities are 8.85 telepathy. She also has a little bit of F-Psy ability, but instead of seeing the future, she has very limited ability to see the past, and that's called backsight. And she's considered like I think 1.5 on that scale. There are content warnings in this book for suicide, for murder, and also abuse of a child by a parent, and also abuse of a child by a teacher. They're separate and 2 different characters. So be aware of that going into it. It does come up and it is mentioned, but none of it is seen in present time. It's all reflecting on the past. So the book opens with Sophia, who has been called in to interview a sociopath, Gerard Bonner, who has been convicted of murder, but they are still trying to find where he's buried the majority of his victims. Bonner likes to play mind games with Sophia and deliberately obscures his thoughts. So instead of playing into his games, she stands up and leaves and refuses to talk to him. We find out that this case is being coordinated by Max Shannon and also by Bartholomew Rubin, who is the prosecutor on the case. And so all 3 are working together to try and find the victims of Bonner. And so all 3 of them are working towards finding Bonner's victims. We find out that Sophia is very aware that silence is an issue for the Psy at the moment. And we also know that her silence and her shields are not fantastic, and that as a J-Psy, she has a shelf life. They really don't last very long because what they do is so highly specialized and so highly traumatic that eventually their shields just completely crumble and they have to be completely reconditioned, and they're basically not the same person. And she's been doing this longer than most. So she's very aware that she's in a precarious situation. We find out that silence doesn't work very well with her. We also find out that she constantly wears gloves and that she has been told to avoid physical touch because it could actually deteriorate her shields very quickly. While she's at the prison, we also find out that a lot of J-Psy have a habit of going vigilante. So not only can they retrieve memories, but because most of them are quite highly skilled telepaths, they also have the ability to directly impact and influence other people. And before she leaves the prison, she telepathically attacks one of the inmates who has done, I'm pretty sure he's a pedophile or has done something quite severe, basically rendering him catatonic. And it becomes known that that's a common occurrence with the J-Psy. They have a really hard time not meting out justice, especially if they feel that their punishment is not in line with the crime. Most people in the justice system know that this happens and they don't call out the J-Psy. There's an ethical dilemma right there, but it's a really fascinating part of it because it shows just how much these J-Psy feel. Like they actually can't do their job without feeling anything. The really cool thing about this book is we have a lot of interplay with Nikita Duncan, who is a character I'm really fascinated by. Nikita knows about Max, and Max is a bit of a nuisance to the Psy because he's an enforcement officer, but he also has natural psychic shields. So he's very, very hard for the Psy to read. And there's a lot of Psy in enforcement. I think pretty sure his boss is a Psy, and they value him in a lot of ways, but they also know that they can't control him, so that's where he becomes a bit of a nuisance. What he is, though, is very good at his job. We find out that Nikita's advisors have been turning up dead, and many of them are made to look like suicides or accidents, but she doesn't believe that that's the case, and so she ends up recruiting Max and Sophia to investigate all these deaths and to find out what's actually going on. Sophia is really deeply fascinated by Max, and when Max first comes to San Francisco, because they both have to travel out there because that's where Nikita lives, Clay and Talon pick up Max from the airport, and this ties back into book 4, which is really nice to see because we don't get a huge amount of Clay and Talon overall and seeing their life after they've become a couple. So it was nice to see them reconnect with Max and to have that relationship. And when Sophia arrives, Talon is in the process of inviting Max to dinner with her and Clay, and so she also includes Sophia in that. We learn a lot about Sophia throughout this book, and I really do like her on this reread. When I was reading it, I couldn't remember much about her, but on reread, just rereading her story made her a really appealing character for me because she is so conflicted. She is in this very highly stressful job. She knows that at the end of it, she's basically going to cease to exist the way that she is. There's times where she thinks about how people have essentially advised her that before the Psy recondition her completely, suicide would be the better option for her. It would be a kind of fate to not have to live through the end of her career. And again, as I said, there's a lot of ethical dilemmas and a lot of morally grey things that are happening in this book. And that's one of them because it's something that's always at the forefront of her mind now because she knows that everything is beginning to fall apart. And we also know that when she was 8 years old, something really traumatic happened to her. We haven't discovered what it is yet, but what it did had a profound impact on the way that she connects to the Psy-Net, on the way that her shields function, and is possibly the reason why she doesn't function the same way as the majority of the Psy. The reason she wears gloves is because she is a sensitive. She has not been able to physically touch anyone for the past 4 years because it just sets off everything. And this is really important because everyone projects something, but Max doesn't. And so that becomes really important. And it's while they're investigating the first of the murders that Max and Sophia begin to open up a little bit to each other about this. And Max reveals a little bit about his past and how his mother essentially hated him and was quite verbally abusive towards him growing up. And Sophia also reveals that she knows that Max has shields, and when she says that, he challenges her to touch him because he is aware that she can't touch anyone. And the reason she can't do that is because she'll pick up all of their thoughts, whereas Max has a natural shield, so it's less likely she'll pick something up for him, and it might give her that ability to actually have human contact again. Throughout this whole story, they're constantly investigating 2 cases. So they're constantly investigating Nikita's advisor's deaths, as well as the Bonner case. So this comes back, it weaves in and out of the story the whole time. And in the first third of the book, Bonner, who has decided he really likes Sophia and who wants to play with her, says that he's willing to talk. And rather than fly back out to see him and give him the satisfaction of going to him, Sophia decides only to video call with him, which really sets him off. But she's really unwilling to get involved in his power games. When Nikita's chief financial officer, Edward Chan, is found dead, Max and Sophia are some of the first people on the scene to investigate it. They discover he's been stabbed in the heart. They think that it's possibly been dealt by a telepathic blow, which suspects that these cases are no longer accidents. They're deliberate attempts to remove key players in Nikita's business to weaken her. And when they review surveillance footage from just outside Edward Chan's apartment, they see Sasha Duncan visiting one of the people who works for her mother. And so they end up going into Dark River territory to talk to Sasha and Lucas and to find out why Sasha was there and whether or not she heard anything. At this point, Lucas didn't realise that Sasha had gone into her mother's building, and so he's rather furious because she's pregnant and he's very overprotective. Sasha reveals that she took Dorian with her, which is a hilarious scene. It's one of my favourite scenes. And then while Max and Sophia go off to continue their investigation and to talk to some of their key suspects, Sasha and Lucas go to visit Dorian, who was there with surveillance equipment while Sasha was in the building, because of course he was, and they see if they can pick up any extra information. After interviewing the suspects, Sophia has her first ever backsight vision. So I mentioned earlier that backsight is an offshoot of F-Psy capabilities. So Faith Nightstar is a foreseer, so she sees the future. Backsight, I think, is relatively rare, and most people who have it only ever see 1 or 2 backsight visions in their lifetime. So this is the first one Sophia's ever had, and it's of Max's childhood, and she sees his childhood and the way his mother treated him, and also his brother River, I'm pretty sure, who has gone missing. It's at this point that Sophia's Psy-Net shields begin to change. They actually become more efficient. And this is a really good thing for her because her shields are beginning to degrade, but now they're functioning in a completely different way. And while it's good for her, it does draw attention to her because nobody's shields change that dramatically so quickly. And at this point, Sophia is not entirely sure what's caused the change or how they've actually become far more effective for her. But people do begin to notice and start questioning what's going on. Around this time, Max cooks dinner for Sophia. He also kisses her, and she then opens up and reveals what's going to happen to her when she retires, that essentially they will wipe her brain and she will no longer be the person that she was beforehand, and that she basically will be unable to function in the world the same way, and that she has no choice but to stay in the Psy-Net because she functions as a minor anchor, which I mentioned in the last video, and I couldn't remember how early that little bit of information that we got in the previous book came up, and then I remembered that it was because of Sophia. She is a minor anchor, which is someone who has the ability to bond with the Psy-Net at a really deep level. They're basically entwined with it, so they can't leave it because they're just part of it, and they help support the structure of the net. This does become really important, and it's part of the reason why her shields change and why she has a connection to both the net minds. We also find out about exactly what happened to her as a child. So she tells Max that when she was 8 years old, she was removed from her family group and taken to a facility outside the city to be trained with other young telepaths. These were all people with JPSI capabilities, and they were all quite young, but it turned out that their instructor was a sociopath, and he essentially tortured and ended up killing the majority of the children. Sophia was, I think, the only one to survive, but she lived through the deaths of all of her friends. But it was so traumatic that it fundamentally changed the way that she functioned as a Psy, as a telepath, and as a JPSI. So that was the formative experience that influenced everything else that happened to her. There's another side step back into the Bonner case where they actually do go back out to see him, and Sophia finally gets the location of the second victim, much to Bonner's chagrin. And while they're out of San Francisco, Faith Nightstar has a vision and contacts Sophia and lets her know that the car that she and Max are traveling in has been rigged with a bomb, and therefore saves their life. It's at this point they realize that the next victim in their case for Nikita is Sasha, because Sasha's pregnancy has recently gone public. She's a very well-known figure, and this person is targeting Nikita, so they up the security on basically everyone. As a result of all this, we begin to see Nikita and Anthony develop an alliance because they both have territory within San Francisco. So they're the two geographically closest Psy Council members, and with both their daughters living outside the Psy-Net, they do strike up this tentative alliance. It's really great. If I don't get a Nikita and Anthony book at some point in the future, I'm going to be really disappointed. Sophia fears that her mental state is deteriorating, and so she wants to pursue more with Max before she runs out of time. Max is furious that they may not have time because he's really started to fall for Sophia. And that night, after they begin to explore their relationship, Sophia collapses and Faith and Vaughn arrive to help. And Faith believes that Sophia is crucial to a lot of the visions that she's seeing around changes in the Psy race and the Psy-Net. They realize that their investigation for Nikita has connections to pure Psy, so Sophia plans to go into the Psy-Net, and she takes Faith and Desiree as backup with her as they try to hunt down the people who might be behind all of the attacks. And while she's in the Psy-Net, her shields misbehave again, but Sophia almost pleads for them to stabilize and to behave in a way that's not going to draw attention to her. And they actually do. And this is where we see how strong that connection is with the net minds, because they're trying to protect her and they're trying to keep her safe because she keeps them safe by functioning as an anchor, which I think is a really cool concept just overall in this world building. While Sophia's doing that, Max is continuing to rule out the different suspects they have in the case. And at the same time, Jared Bonner escapes from custody. Max and Sophia have sex for the first time, and then the next day when Sophia is out investigating part of the case, she ends up being kidnapped by Psy. And Max enlists the help of Nikita and Dark River in order to try and track down who has her and where she might have been taken. And then when they find Sophia's kidnappers, they've been killed by Bonner, who has in turn kidnapped Sophia again. So poor Sophia's having a really terrible day. Nikita ends up sending Caleb Krychek to help Max, because Caleb is a teleporter, and so he can help teleport Max to exactly where Sophia and Bonner are. And the two work together to save her, which is a great scene. It's actually a really great insight into the way that Caleb works. And once they find them, Caleb ends up stripping Bonner's mind of all of the information that they needed for the case, because he has no compunction doing that. He is a cardinal telepath, telekinetic, and so he takes all of the information from Bonner's mind, and basically Bonner dies as a result of it. And Caleb really feels very little remorse over doing that because in his mind, Bonner was a bad person. They needed the information in order to give respite to the victims' families, but also Bonner didn't deserve to live. So yeah, this is why I love Caleb, because he's such a morally great character. When Sophia is taken to be treated for her injuries, it's discovered that her shields have completely recovered. She no longer needs to be really closely monitored. Max figures out that the person behind the attacks on Nikita's personnel is a guy called Quentin Gareth, and he figures this out just as Gareth ends up walking Nikita into Max's apartment at gunpoint. We find out that Gareth works for Pure Psy and Henry Scott, the counsellor who is gone rogue. And after Max and Sophia neutralise Gareth, Nikita ends up offering Max a job as her chief of security, which is really cool. Sophia also proposes to work for Nikita, so the two end up being hired by her and end up working together and get there happily ever after, which is great. In terms of greater world plot, I talked a little bit about the Psy at the beginning of the video. So they're telepaths. Their purpose is to retrieve memories and then to share them with others so that cases can be prosecuted. It turns out that they have eidetic memories when it comes to retrieving that information, which is why they don't last very long in their job, because basically they remember every horrible thing that they're asked to recall. They're only ever brought in on really, really serious, heinous cases as a result of that, which of course doesn't help because those are probably the most horrific cases to be involved in. Once a Psy takes the memories from someone, they can't be retrieved by anyone else. This makes them really good targets because they're the only ones who have the memories now. And so we find out that Sophia has been targeted for assassination in the past because of memories that she's taken. And because of the stressful nature of their work, Psy have their conditioning checked every single month, and they're basically reconditioned every month. In terms of Caleb, in this book, we learn that he likes to run, which is probably more of a fun fact from the world, but you know, there you go. He likes to run, but he also has really strong shields in the Psy-Net, and at the beginning of this book, someone has tried to break through those shields. We don't really find out who, and we don't find out why, but it's just mentioned, and that will become important later on. Sasha Duncan is pregnant, and she's beginning to question her relationship with her mother and her mother's relationship with her. She's also continuing to read the book about the Psy that Nikita had sent her, and she discovers that Cardinal Psy, like herself, used to be able to stop riots. So they actually had enough ability to stop people who were just in a frenzy, and she's struggling to work out how that actually happened because she struggles with just one person and she's supposedly capable of stopping hundreds at a time. Nikita and Caleb continue to have their own alliance. They discuss Henry Scott's behavior. They talk about his travel plans and how wherever he seems to have been, there are incidents or accidents or things that occurred just after he leaves. And so they're beginning to wonder about his connection to Pure Psy and what to do about it. In a really interesting turn of events at the end of this book, the Arrows, who were previously loyal to Ming Lebon, have switched allegiance to Caleb, and Ming doesn't know that yet. And then finally, my fun things from this book, because this book is actually quite serious now that I think about it. It deals with a lot of really heavy things. The Psy are known for projecting a really perfect image. However, Sophia's description describes her as having a scar which she received when she was a child. Most Psy would have had that cosmetically fixed, but she never did. So she has this permanent scar, which also identifies her as an unusual Psy to begin with. And most people find it quite unsettling to look at her because of her scar. Max has a cat called Morpheus, who he carts around with him, which is great. I really like the fact that we see the renewed friendship between Max and Talon and Clay, and that hasn't been lost in the story. I really liked how throughout the story it's discussed that Sophia really wants connection with people. She is very different from the other Psy in her experiences, in her job, and the way that her job deeply affects her on an emotional level. And the whole time you can just see that she wants an emotional connection, and she's just not sure how to go about getting it, especially since she can't touch people and she can't find comfort in that. And I just thought that it was such a poignant part of the story and something that set Sophia apart from the start, because it's said that she wants that connection. She's always wanted that. Roman and Julian are brought up, and there's something about them being called the Hellion Fan Club, which I just thought was adorable. Throughout the story, wherever they go, Max collects the phone numbers of women. He has no intention of following through and calling any of them, but people, wherever he goes, people just sort of hand him their phone numbers because he's meant to be very attractive and very appealing to people. and it becomes a source of annoyance for Sophia, and Max uses it to tease her. And it's never done in a malicious way, but it was just a really funny part of the story because she just gets so frustrated when every time they go out somewhere, he gets handed a phone number. And as I mentioned earlier, I really liked the scene where Lucas got so annoyed that Sasha had gone to see her mother without telling him, and that she'd taken Dorian along. We know that Dorian will do anything for Sasha, and that he'll even go against Lucas to do the things that she wants him to do, which I thought was hilarious. So those are my thoughts on the story. I really liked it overall, much better on reread than the first time through. And like I've said the whole way through the series, because I'm no longer reading it just solely for the characters, I'm looking at it from how everything fits together like pieces in a puzzle. It is so fascinating to go back and to realize that characters who the first time through I thought maybe were probably not as interesting as some of the others are actually really, really deeply fascinating, and they fit into the world so seamlessly that, yeah, this is why rereading is important. All right, enough rambling. I will leave a link to everything that you need to know down below, especially the stuff about our live read-alongs. I am hopefully going to be reading Play of Passion in the next week or so, so stay tuned for that recap as well. I hope that wherever you are in the world, you're staying safe and healthy, and I will see you in my next video. Thanks so much for watching. Bye, everyone.